Welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 12, Alexis D. Tocqueville. Let us start with introduction. Sheldon Wolin has pointed out that the Federalist Papers and democracy in America are the two classes in American political theory. While the former represents the thinking of the founding fathers of the American Republic, the latter is invoked more often in support of such interpretation of present-day American politics. The author of Democracy in America, Charles Alexis Henry Clairel de Tocqueville, was one of the most imaginative French political theorists, sociologist, and a historian of the 19th century. His writing reflected the concerns of a historian, a political scientist, and a sociologist, making it difficult to categorize these. Tocqueville was concerned with the future of the democratic society and was conscious of the tumultuous social changes that his times produced and impact it had. He understood democracy as an unstoppable march towards the equality in all its dimensions: legal, political, social, and economic. Tocqueville, along with his friend Gustave de Belmont, visited America in 1831 to study its democratic institutions and drew lessons for French and penned them down in two volumes entitled Democracy in America. He analyzed the federal constitution, the question of people's sovereignty, the role of constitution, and warned about the tyranny of the majority, a theme that John Stuart Mill subsequently developed. He could grasp the new and universal trend, namely the desire for equality and its intricate relationship with individual liberty and democracy. He stressed on the importance of local self-government, decentralized administration, widespread ownership of property, and voluntary associations for maintenance of public liberties, stability of government, and protection against the tyranny of the majority. Like Charles Louis de Scottient Montesquieu, he admired English political institutions and the English aristocracy. Unlike France, the English aristocracy constantly renewed itself and was in a position to wield its authority through proper exercise of political experience and wisdom. He could perceive the momentous changes sweeping his time, which was why he described it as the end of an era and a beginning of a new one. Both Montesquieu and the Tocqueville dissected the merits and demerits of the different form of governments not in an abstract, timeless sense, but in its historical, political, and social context. Tocqueville, according to J.S. Mill, was the first to write about democracy and its actual functioning in the belief that it could become a viable political system. An aristocrat, Tocqueville became a liberal while studying and writing about American democracy. He considered freedom or liberty as the core political value, which stood threatened by the lethal combination of political democracy and social equality. Democracy in America is considered as the best ever written work on democracy and the best book ever written on America. Tocqueville considered America to be at the forefront of a great democratic revolution and that it would bring to Europe an almost complete equality of condition, like the one that existed in the New World. His aim was to describe the impact of democratic social conditions not only on politics but also on civil society, on habits, ideas, and mores. He did not think it was necessary for Europe to initiate American political institutions, but stressed that the study of America would yield instruction from which Europe could gain. An analysis of the writing of Tocqueville does not allow us to simply conclude that he was an aristocratic reactionary. Curtis labeled him as an aristocratic conservative, while Kirk regarded him as the liberal conservative in the same tradition as Edmund Burke. In Tocqueville writings, one finds both liberal and conservative dimensions. His passion for freedom and its protection, and the desire to protect property right, represent the liberal tendencies. As a conservative, he was the first to caution against the dangers about too much of democracy. Now let us listen Tocqueville on democracy, revolution, and the modern state. Tocqueville accepted that there have been healthy aristocracies, but the French landed nobility was undermined by the policies of the absolute monarchs, which had centralized the government apparatus and excluded the old aristocracy from provincial administration. The aristocracy had its privileges, but without any link between duty and privileges. Tocqueville regarded the link of interdependence and obligation between social groups as of crucial significance. He often compared the French nobility with their counterpart in England and praised the latter's modest and low key profile, which allowed their continued participation in local administration and politics throughout the 19th century. Tocqueville was equally critical of the Irish aristocracy, generally absentee landlords who remained unconcerned about the plight of their tenants. He concluded that an aristocracy once dislodged could never be restored. Though Tocqueville disliked revolutions, yet he offered a balanced view. He considered that while one great revolution may establish liberty in the country, several revolutions in succession make orderly liberty impossible there for a long time. He disliked the reign of terror and despotism, of the French Revolution. Our economists had a vast contempt for the past. The nation has been governed, Latron declared, on wrong lines altogether. One has the impression that everything was left to chance. Starting out from this premise, they set to work, and there was no French institution, however vulnerable and well founded, for whom immediate suppression they did not clamor, if it hampered them to even the slightest extent, or did not fit in with their neatly ordered scheme of government. When we closely study the French Revolution, we find that it was conducted in precisely the same spirit as that which gave rise to so many books expounding theories of government in the abstract. Our revolutionaries had the same fondness for broad generalization, cut and dried legislative systems, and appendix symmetry, the same contempt for hard facts, the same taste for reshaping institutions on novel, ingenious, original lines, the same desire to construct the entire system instead of trying to rectify its faulty part. He did not, like Burke, criticize the French Revolution in its totality, for he approved of its commitment to freedom and equality. But what he disapproved was the subsequent stress on extreme equality that undermined liberty and human greatness. Though he proclaimed himself to be an aristocrat by instinct, one which despised and feared the masses, he was prepared to accept the defeat of his class as inevitable. He described his age as a new one characterized by a desire for equality, a movement that was ardent, insatiable, incessant, and invisible. American for him symbolized this new universal trend. He was worried that this passion for equality would lead to uniformity, which would eventually destroy liberty. The power of public opinion led to conformity rather than individuality, mediocrity rather than excellence, materialism rather than spiritualism. Tocqueville took note of the widespread respect for the rule of law in America, whereas in French arbitrary rule had only encouraged contempt for the law. In America and England, local self governing institutions were strong, whereas in France, the sale of municipal offices by the crown had weakened the tradition. In America, people naturally formed associations and groups, whereas in France, individualism and reliance on omniscience of central government were much stronger. In America, there was no fear from an elected chief executive, since the Constitution not only limited the powers of the government but also had an elaborate mechanism of checks and balance to counter any excess. In France, by contrast, the long established tradition of centralized administrative power and a weak legislature made the elected president at the head of the executive a threat to liberty. As a socialist, Tocqueville took interest in the ethos of society and pointed to the contractual nature of modern relationships without any moral obligations or human affections. He understood the role of the state as one that would unify all special interests of the various social classes into a whole body politic. He could see the need for an adequate and equitable system of taxation if the state had to last for long. His insights into the economic foundations of the modern state enabled him to brilliantly analyze the character of the absolutist state. In American regime at La Revolution, he discussed in detail the unfair distribution of taxes and subsidies among the classes, with the peasantry bearing the brunt. The absolutist state was made possible when the king liberated himself from constitutional institutions such as estates or parliaments in order to become free and independent to raise taxes for his own military or domestic projects. Tocqueville was also cautious about the spread of democracy. He understood democracy to mean not only increased political participation but also civic and social equality. Abrogation of privileges was a means to an inevitable trend to the creation of an egalitarian society. The consequences of this change were momentous. Removal of social barrier led to new innovations. It also meant constant change within the social structure as in a democratic society. Unlike its precedents, there would be absence of natural leaders. Individuals would have to fight for political position on the basis of interest rather than privileges. The passion for equality would lead to social leveling, eroding any differences among human beings. Equality conferred power over public opinion, and that meant the rule of the average person in the street. He argued that equal social conditions could lead to either sovereignty of all or the absolute power of an man. It is in fostering free and participatory political institutions that he saw the key to resisting the despotic tendencies inherent in the principle of equality. Tocqueville's notion of inevitable progress of equality is similar to the contemporary notion of modernization. It is a historic process that would undermine all traditional or aristocratic political order that did not result in democratic self government. Tocqueville defined liberty as absence of external political restrictions. He remained skeptical and fearful of the excessive emphasis on equality. He took note of the threat of the tyranny of the majority, which would manifest itself in the form of intolerance of individual deviation from the social norm. But he was realistic enough to accept the inevitable progress towards equality and attempted to reconcile equality with liberty. His political ideals were freedom under the rule of law. He was insistent that people ought to have, as far as possible, direct control over their own affairs through vibrant local government and free associations, something that was different from decentralization under federalism. He, like Thomas Jefferson, considered strong local institutions as a preventative to arbitrary intervention by central authority and the revolutionary subversion of the state, an aspect that the neoconservatives in the United States revived in the last quarter of the 20th century. By tyranny of the majority in America, Tocqueville did not believe, like James Madison, in a permanent and deep division in the community between majority and minority, but a widespread consensus among citizens who really felt that laws enacted by the majority were arbitrary or unjustly coercive. Equal political rights and active participation in the political process gave individuals an equal love and respect for the laws of which they considered themselves the author. Besides political equality, there was social equality, which was so widespread that it underpinned the idea of majority rule. He also pointed out to the issues of uniformity, considering it among the undesirable aspects of American life. He observed that unlike Europe, there was just one society in America. It may be either rich or poor, humble or brilliant, trading or agriculture, but it composed everywhere of the same element. The plane of uniform civilization has passed over it. The man you left in New York, you find again in almost impenetrable solitude. Same clothes, same attitude, same language, same habits, same pleasures. Tocqueville attributed this striking uniformity in the spirit of equality that made possible stable community life. The problem of uniformity was not a political one. Government and laws were seldom used for oppression and coercion, as there was no distinct and separate group of citizens to coerce and oppress. Neither was majority rule a source of domination and despotism. Instead, what it ensured was that fundamental differences did not arise within the community. What Tocqueville feared was the moral power of the public opinion in America, which not only regulated people's action but also modeled their very nature as well. He also noted with appreciation the extent of uniformity, as it seemed to suggest that majority of spirits were joined together in the expression of certain general opinions. However, this uniformity and harmony indicated a voluntary tyranny. Besides uniformity, there existed profound isolation and dependence that made possible for coercion and thereby reinforced the uniformity inherent in an egalitarian community. He also observed that the old categories of political thought were inadequate to deal with this new state of affairs. Unlike traditional forms of despotism that oppressed through political coercion, the new form is neither political nor overtly oppressive. It is social in nature. J.S. Mill took note of this observation and incorporated it in his arguments for freedom of individuality. His critique of majority domination and egalitarianism in his treatise. Mill believed that if people had the right idea about democracy, then the tyranny of the majority that Tocqueville warned about could be abated. Unlike Tocqueville, Mill was sanguine that if the best minds could ensure their ascendancy by calling for democracy accompanied by representation, would not threaten to induce debasement of intelligence or cultural deprivation. Representative democracy would ensure a free society without a dominant power. Unlike Tocqueville, who elogied the aristocracy, Mill regarded it as a menace to the progress of civilization. Tocqueville, like Montesquieu, considered commerce as the inevitable and appropriate development of growing social equality and individual freedom. However, he could also perceive the destructive side of unrestrained materialism and the hazards of excessive economic inequality. He pointed to the twin dangers of the relationship between democracy and equality that would result in tyranny of the majority, and also whether democracy was sufficient to overcome the powerful inegalitarian tendency latent in the development of capitalism. Tocqueville regarded slavery as not only inhuman but also contrary to the enlightened self-interest of the slave owners themselves. He rejected Joseph Arthur Gobineau's idea of racial hierarchy and warned against the selective misuse of the thesis, like the anti-abolitionist leader in America who argued that the blacks were different and inferior, but suppressed the proposition that the Anglo-Saxon race was also on the decline. He considered racial hierarchy as another form of aristocracy that was destined to crumble by the onslaught of democracy and social equality. Here we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.